Chapter 20. At the conclusion of chapter 19, the Alter Rebbe explained the concept of Mesiras Nefesh. Now, Mesiras Nefesh is translated as sacrifice of self, surrender of self, and it is most commonly associated with the great heroes of our history who literally went to their death, or at least were willing to go to their death, rather than even momentarily, even to pretend to deny or to sever their relationship with Hashem. And the Alter Rebbe explains that this is not due to heroism. It is due simply to the essentially involuntary and thus unbreakable connection that a Jew has with Hashem, being simply the product of the neshama being an actual part of Hashem, which you recall from chapter 2. That is the premise upon which really, I guess, all of Tanya is built, that a Jew intuitively desires to be in alliance with Hashem, even if he has no conscious, tangible aspect of his identity that is aligned with the infinity of Hashem. It simply is. And even if he's confronted with a momentary and even a pretend denial of that, this desire to be aligned with Hashem, this love. Now, again, when we use the word love, we don't only mean the type of love that it's my greatest passion. I like it more than anything else, although that is an aspirational level. We mean rather the essential idea that this is what I am connected with. This is who I am. This is where I want to be, and this is my identity. So what happens to that? It gets smothered by all kinds of distraction and temptation and justification and so on. But when it becomes so clear cut that this next action is going to be, God forbid, a total defiance and denial of the infinity of Hashem, so at that moment he can no longer fool himself that, well, this is okay and it doesn't matter and so on and so forth. So then that love, which may have been buried under all kinds of distraction, it has become an ava misuteres, a hidden love, but it is there nonetheless because it's always there. It can never be killed off. That will burst through the klipa prison and it will express itself, even if it means that I lose my human identity. So, in short, we might say that the message of Hasidus is that God exists, and the speculation is whether or not I exist. The answer ultimately is yes, I do exist, and my existence is meaningful and important because it affirms and it executes the true existence of Hashem. So rather than asking somebody, do you believe in God, which begins with the premise of my own existence, and then the challenge of whether or not I, myself, believe in God, I benefit from God, we begin with the premise that God exists, and thus we ask ourselves, if so, what do we exist for? And we say, well, we exist to be in fulfillment of the purpose for which God created us. So if the challenge comes, God forbid, between my own existence and fulfilling God's will, since the whole purpose of my existence is only to fulfill God's will, it, in a sense, and again, I don't mean to be flip about it, it essentially becomes no challenge at all. I only exist because I am in the fulfillment of Hashem's purpose. And therefore, if my existence is dependent on denying God's purpose, well, there's no discussion whatsoever. I have not lost the narrative. But sometimes we get so caught up in it, that is the Ruach Shdus, that we forget what we're doing. As a very crass illustration, I remember in the beginning of COVID, when prices were going nuts, and they said to the steel manufacturer, "But you're a steel manufacturing business." He says, "I'm not in the steel manufacturing business. I'm in the money making business. I'm not here to make steel. I'm here to make money. I make money through steel." Now, you may consider that crass capitalism and so on, but at least he's got his eye on the prize. He understands what he's doing here. I'm here to make money. That's what I'm here for. I'm not here to make steel. I'm here to make money. Okay, and this is where we mistakenly allow ourselves to sometimes be distracted by minimizing the impact of the sin. Oh, it's not such a big deal. Or minimizing ourselves. I'm not so holy anyway. And it's in those micros that we have this tolerance for this justification. And one of the points the Alter Rebbe is going to try to emphasize, or is going to emphasize in this chapter, is no, the sense of magnitude is part of the foolishness of the Nefesh HaBahamis. The Nefesh HaBahamis has decided that this isn't such a big deal. And again, if the premise is my own existence, then I'm the arbiter of what is good or bad. God makes the recommendations, the suggestions, and I don't mean that to be silly, and I'll determine whether or not I'm going to do it. I think this is important, I'm going to do it. I don't think it's so important, I'm not going to do it. It's important, but it's not important under this circumstance, etc. So again, that sort of most profound illustration, we don't just want to be willing to die for God, we want to be committed to living for Hashem, which can sometimes be more difficult because it's an ongoing and a constant. Now, the agenda of this chapter is how can we apply the resolve of this intuitive alliance with Hashem? Ava, love, but not love like, oh, it's my favorite thing. We would like that. That is an aspiration, but it is absolutely so. And again, the most profound illustration we have of this is we have a premise that everybody wants to be alive. We love to be alive. And that's why we intuitively protect ourselves. Our body intuitively rejects anything. We have an innate fear of anything that is, God forbid, harmful, because the body wants to be alive. And again, I don't mean to be crass about it, and I apologize. We talk about people, God forbid, who fail in committing suicide. We say, well, how could you fail? I mean, just God forbid. Why? Because the body rejects the idea of harming itself. So that's the body longs to be alive, and thus it rejects any attempt to sever that. Well, our neshama has as intense, if not a more intense desire to be in alliance with Hashem. And if we can apply this as we would in a dramatic moment to the everyday, then any Avera would be seen as a violation of God's will, and thus a violation of my relationship with Hashem. And hopefully not, but I can only imagine that everybody has experienced or seen or heard about somebody who's been very harshly hurt by somebody else, even though the action itself is not all that significant. It's just that they've been made to feel like the outsider. Everybody was laughing at them. It's just a momentary thing. They didn't physically harm them. It was just a momentary thing. But in that moment, they felt completely isolated, rejected, severed, and pushed away. Well, essentially, that's what happens anytime a person does an Avera. They're saying Hashem is not that important to me. They have pushed Hashem away. And thus, we want to grasp this oneness of Hashem and this consistent oneness that we have with Hashem, so that nothing is not a big deal. Meaning everything in that moment it's in perfect alliance and so on. So remember, we talked about in the last two chapters, chapters 18 and 19, when we began this journey down the short, long way, what do we do before we master the intellect? And we've appealed to this characteristic of our intuitive desire to be in alliance with the infinity of Hashem. And we spoke about what is this ahava, this love. And again, love doesn't necessarily mean I love it like it's my favorite thing to do. What do we mean? What is its goal? And its goal, as we described in the last chapter, is to forfeit its very own identity. Hopefully you recall the analogy the Alter Rebbe developed in the previous chapter with the flame longing to separate itself from the candle, even though that means that the flame will be subsumed into the atmosphere. And yet, that's what it wants. It wants to separate itself from the candle. That's what our neshama wants. It wants to be in total alliance and subsumed within the infinity of Hashem. And it comes from this quality called chachma. Now, you have maybe familiar that one of the great pushbacks against the teachings of Hasidus in the times of the Baal Shem Tov and even through the times of the Alter Rebbe was this concern that somehow Hasidus as a culture was diminishing of scholarship. We know that in Jewish life, scholarship is held up high as one of our greatest ideals. We cherish the concept of the pursuit of scholarship. Torah study is the equivalent of them all. You recognize it from the Mishnah. It's part of the daily davening. Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam. Socially, the scholar is held up in the highest regard. And the Chassidus comes along and it gives another definition to the characteristic of Chachma. Now, commonly, if you ask somebody, what is Chachma, what is a Chacham? It's a really smart person, a person who's got a great IQ, a person who has accumulated a lot of data and information, a person who is a real diligent student. These are the characteristics of a Chacham and of Chachma. Chassidus comes along and introduces a higher level of Chachma. It's not different, meaning it's not saying that that's wrong, that definition is wrong, but there is within the entirety of life, as we know, there is the conceptual and then there is the implementable. So the implementable of Chachma is the person who knows the data. They have the information. They know what to do if you put chicken soup in the cereal bowl. They know what the rules are. They know what the laws are. They can recite volumes of Talmud study. That is true. That is a characteristic of Chachma. The Alter Rebbe introduces, well, or incorporates the Kabbalistic idea that Chachma is the willingness to go completely beyond and outside of myself, to completely get outside of my identity, to completely go away from my own sense of self. That is, rather than begin with the premise of my own existence, can I begin with the premise of God's existence? That's truly the quality of Chachma. It's the quality of Bittul. It's not yet developed into wisdom and information and data retention and analysis. It is simply the willingness to go beyond. And again, as we have discussed with the example of learning language or true scholarship, is the person who's willing to get outside of themselves, which is very uncomfortable because I like to think that I know things. I don't like to feel like I'm stumbling around in the dark. Many times people describe, oh, I love learning, but learning can be difficult. Learning can be a real challenge. To genuinely be able to learn something can be very, very difficult. And so Chassidus introduces that that's really what this Ava is predicated on. Now, just to finish this sort of historical perspective. Now, imagine you are in the standard yeshiva system in 1800, whatever, and you're surrounded by people who are consumed by virtuously the study of Torah, all the areas of Torah, and you hold up as the highest level Chachma, like the intellect, the head is above the rest of the body, and the highest quality, highest meaning both most valuable, as well as even physically, anatomically, the highest is the intellect. And at that level, you are suddenly told, well, there's something higher than that. Not more chachma, not more wisdom, but the idea of total bittul, which doesn't feel like wisdom in the moment. On the contrary, it almost feels like the opposite of wisdom, because I get to a point where I say, I don't know. That gets very frustrating. And as we know, just from life experience, and especially as Chassidus emphasizes, even science, the deeper and deeper you go, becomes more and more like art. Meaning you begin science with basic math. 1 plus 2 is 3, 3 plus 2 is 5. And you say, that's science, it's locked in. And if I can master that, I have mastered mathematics. And then most people, that's about as far as they go. And they learn some geometry and trigonometry. But if you were to continue on and start genuinely learning engineering and learning about building skyscrapers and spaceships and so on, you start to realize that even concepts as seemingly inflexible as time and math and so on start to have a certain artistic character to them, a certain flexibility that science starts to morph into a form of art. Now, of course, this is very easily manipulable by saying, oh, you see, there's no such thing as facts. Everything is just made up. You could go with such an argument. What we're saying is, as we move along, Science itself becomes art. Math itself becomes art. These rigid concepts start to lose their rigidity, time and space and so forth, and as they are measured. And that's very frustrating. What do you mean? Well, that's ridiculous. That doesn't make any sense. Because it's humbling. That's what bittul is. That's what this level of love is. And it's disturbing. So again, imagine a guy sitting in the yeshiva for 100 years, and all of a sudden this comes along. This sounds like heresy. It's totally disrupting the whole model that we have operated under. Yeah. Now you start to see why there was a little pushback. I mean, there's always going to be the petty side and the jealousy, and I never heard of this, and my rabbi is better than your rabbi, kind of simplistic, almost immature competition. But now you start to see, right, this is very disruptive. So some people embrace it. They love that idea of going beyond ideas, but others not so down with it. What then happens to this ava in the person who's not in compliance with it? Where to go? Well, it gets cluttered. It gets cluttered by mishigas. We got mishigas. The ruach shtus, the spirit of foolishness, incrementally allows us to somehow forfeit this kind of absolute awareness. We become a little sloppy. We become self-justifying, etc., etc. And then, as we focused on in the previous chapter, in chapter 19, it must include the characteristic called yira, awe or focus, because if not, we become so caught up that we forget to do the mitzvahs. Meaning, I have this desire to surrender myself, but I have to eat matzah, and I have to shake the lulav. I have to then become centered in my identity. The essential point is the premise of whether I exist and therefore I understand that Hashem is the authority. That is, that I validate God's existence. Do you believe in God? That means I am. And now the question is whether I'm going to validate God or Hashem exists, and that's the premise. And if we can reach this sort of, I'm calling it now, higher level of Chachma, I don't know if higher, more refined level of Chachma, less rigid level of Chachma, then I can have access to that level. That I can have access. Of course, there is the applicable, there is the engineering side of Chachma. The engineering side of Chachma is about what to do when I put chicken soup in the cereal bowl. And it's absolutely necessary. The implementable. So I have to decide, is it about what I see and therefore that's what's true? Or is it about this level of godliness and I have to transcend it? Now, that sounds very hazy. Don't confuse me with the facts. But there is a difference between truth and fact. And if we're willing to explore that subtlety, we may, in fact, reach it. So the parak is going to address three main points. Point number one is this idea that all mitzvahs are, in essence, the affirmation of God's oneness, and all averas are a form of idolatry. That is, there's an authority other than God himself. And even though it doesn't feel the way, oh, come on, well, that oh, come on is a Nefesh HaBahamis thing. The Nefesh HaBahamis says, oh, come on, that's not such a big deal. What do you make such a big deal about everything? It's not like I killed anybody. Well, again, that's human. We have a measuring of what we think is so bad versus what is not so bad. And then an idea that really doesn't exist in a secular world, except in a somewhat derogatory meaning, which we'll explore, which is that our relationship with Hashem does not affect Hashem. Now that sounds like, well, I don't care. That doesn't mean, we don't mean that way. I don't say my hand affects me. It is me. It's not something about me. It is me. It is my very existence and my very identity. It's not an add-on. It's not like a garment or an experience or a locale. It's not an add-on. It is who I am. And again, it's an idea that doesn't really exist in a secular world of physics, but it does exist here in our oneness with the infinity of Hashem. And we will explore the human characteristic of speech, which is the way in which Hashem created the world. God said, and how that helps us to capture this idea that God is not affected. Again, in English, that sounds like, well, I don't care, do it. It's not that sense. I am affected by that. It's not affected that much, but I am. If someone's in my way and I go around him, I'm affected by him. If somebody's sitting in the seat next to me, I'm affected by him. Here we're saying I'm not affected. Hashem is not affected, not because he doesn't care, but because we are one with Hashem. It's not something separate. It's not me and God. It is oneness with Hashem. So here we go. Perikov. Again, like we always like to point out, when the parak begins with the letter Vav, as this parak does, it means we're continuing on this theme. This is the theme begun in chapter 18 of the short, long way until I develop that mastery, that my intellect shapes my character and results in changed behavior. I'm going to appeal right to my intuitive love for God, that love that is often hidden, cluttered under distractions and so forth. Moidazois know ye lakol, to everyone. And again, why is it to everyone? Because the student says, well, this isn't me. It doesn't apply to me. This doesn't work for me. I'm not like that. Now, sometimes we wear that as some sort of badge of courage. I'm not like everybody else and I'm different and so on. Especially, I don't know, maybe it's when we're younger and everybody's trying to pigeonhole you into a very particular spot and there's a natural resistance. Don't tell me what to do. Maybe it's a false sense of superiority. I'm not like all those other people who just go following around their bosses. I have creative thinking and so on. Or maybe it's just, well, this doesn't really seem to resonate with me. And therefore I think, well, this doesn't apply to me. I mean, I tried it and it's not for me. It just doesn't work for me. Amongst all of these, the Alter Rebbe reaches out and he says, this is true of everybody. How can you know it's true of everybody? Because you like it. You know, I like, cookies, so everyone must like cookies. Or I like this type of music. I assume everybody likes this type of music. It's not from that perspective. It's simply because of our neshama. And again, the profundity of the first line of chapter 2 of Tanya, that a Jew is not just a human being with a different set of beliefs. He is essentially a different entity. His spiritual identity is different than the Gentiles. It's not a competition. It's not good, bad. It is different. And it is therefore absolutely in unquenchable desire to be in alliance with Hashem. Just as a child longs to be aligned with their parent, even if, God forbid, they had a bad experience with their parent, they still long for that essential connection. That's what they long for. Remember, alliance more than compliance. Compliance is the genre of Shulchan Aruch. Alliance is what we're seeking here. We talk about this a lot on Yom Kippur. On Yom Kippur, there's no thing to do, right? There's no action item. What are we there for? To be simply in alliance. So the Alter Rebbe begins and he says, Moidazois lakol. This should be known for every person. And again, there's a natural sense, well, this doesn't resonate with me. I tried it. It didn't fit with me. Well, maybe it's a little too much me. Well, or maybe I have to ask, who's the me? So if the me is my humanity, so right, then it's going to be a hard match. But it's me, my neshama. Why should he put on tefillin? The same reason I put on tefillin. Because I'm a Jew. And this story after story where people told the Rebbe, this person, he has no connection to Yiddishkeit. So what do you mean? He's a Jew. He has a connection to Yiddishkeit. This Jew has no background. He has a background. He's a descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This is simply who he is, whether he likes it, he doesn't like it, he enjoys it, he doesn't. Sometimes we can come across and say, well, what do you mean you don't like it? Everybody likes this. Everybody likes that because we assume that if I like it, other people are going to like it. You know, this idea like, well, we like democracy. Everyone's going to like democracy. We like whatever it is, this music or this poetry. Everyone's going to like it. You don't understand. I'm going to sort of yell at you until you understand that you do like it. Well, this, the Alter Rebbe is saying, is not the product of some experience. It is simply the essence of your nature. And again, I say, well, I don't like it. Well, who is the I that's not liking it? Ki mitzvahs v'azaras avodah zara shehem shnei dibros harishenim anochi v'lo yilcha hem klolos kol ha'torah kula. Now, the Alter Rebbe lays out for us that the first two of the Ten Commandments, which are, I am Hashem your God, and you shall have no other gods before me, This is all of Torah. Ki dibur anochi kol kol ramach mitzvahs esay, v'lo yilecha kol shin samachay mitzvahs leis esay. V'lochein shamanu anochi v'lo yilecha levad mipi agvura, k'mayim razal ne'shem kolos ha'Torah kula. That is, that the commandment, I am Hashem your God, is the entirety of the 248 obligation mitzvahs, and the statement, you shall have no other gods before me, is the entirety of the 365 prohibitory commandments. And therefore, those were heard directly by the people from Hashem. So let's back up. A little review of the history of the Aseret HaDibros, and then hopefully we'll be able to see how this relates to the discussion at hand. The Yidden, of course, leave Mitzrayim, and they know that they have an objective. Their objective is to get to Mount Har Sinai and receive Torah. And Hashem says, if you do not accept the Torah, then this whole experiment is worthless, and therefore it will be destroyed. Like we said before, the purpose of our existence is to implement the godly instruction. So if we're not willing to implement the godly instruction, we're wasting our time here, and this whole experiment is over. Meaning, if a person is on a journey, he has to know what is his objective. And as we've seen, just in our own lives with technology, we no longer have to go on a journey. We can do it from the desk. We can do it on the computer. And therefore, what are we traveling for? We don't have to fly and rent cars and stay in hotels to have meetings. We can do meetings like this. So if we got caught up in the travel, then we still want to travel. But if our eye is on the prize, which is to effectuate the deal, we don't have to do the travel. So when Hashem says, if you do not accept Torah, then I'm going to destroy the world, meaning there's no purpose of the world. The whole purpose is for this, and if you're not going to do it, you're not going to have it. So Hashem wakes us up, and he takes us out, and Hashem starts speaking to us, and the people say to Moshe, this is too much. Hashem should speak through you, and you filter it down to us, and then we'll be able to function. So that's what happens. We don't hear the other commandments directly from Hashem, only these first two commandments. The first commandment is, or we should be more literal, the Torah describes them as, you've probably heard this phrase in Hebrew, Aseret HaDibros, which translates not as the 10 commandments, but the 10 statements. And that's important because there is much discussion. What is the instruction in the quote, I am God, your Lord, who took you out of the land of Egypt? There's no instruction there. There's no forewarning, and there's no obligation. It's not telling you to do something or to not do something. The second commandment says, you shall have no other gods before me. Okay, that is a prohibition. So we understand that the second commandment is the source of all 365 prohibitions. Because anytime I do something that God doesn't want me to do, I am essentially making a God before me. God said, don't do it. Well, I am doing it. In other words, there's some other authority, whether it's my impulse, or whether it's society, or whether it's somebody yelling at me, or God forbid, somebody threatening me. They're telling me that they're the authority and not me. We have an example. We know that, God forbid, if a person is sickly on Shabbos, we do not hesitate. We put them in the ambulance and we take them to the hospital. Why? Because Torah commands us to live in its mitzvahs and not to die. What happens, God forbid, 1,000 times, if the bad guy comes and he says, cook me a meal on Shabbos, that is a direct Shabbos violation, or so we say, well, I'm allowed to save my life, so I'm allowed to do it. However, what if they say to him, all the Jews, and this is the example in the Talmud, wear black shoelaces, and all the idolaters wear white shoelaces. And again, the point is precisely to be something so insignificant. If you don't wear white shoelaces, we're going to kill you. Now, there's nothing in Torah that says you're not allowed to wear white shoelaces. But what's the problem here? The problem isn't about the white shoelaces or the black shoelaces. The problem is, who is the authority here? Is Hashem the authority, or is the bully the authority? So if the bully is saying, I'm the authority, you're going to violate Shabbos, not because I'm hungry and I want you to cook this meal for me, just because I'm going to demonstrate that I'm in charge and God is not in charge, that even if it's something as silly and again, not innately prohibited. As shoelaces, the person is required to go to their death. Because again, it's not about the shoelaces, it's about who's the authority. Because any time I ascribe authority to any force other than Hashem, I am saying that that is the service of something strange. Avodah Zarah translates as serving something foreign. I am serving something outside of myself. So again, easy for me to say. But when a person is told, look, if you don't come into work this Saturday, you're fired. So he's saying, what's most important is that I have this job. And again, it's easy for me to say, well, I didn't want anyone to know I was Jewish because you can't get this kind of job. I could have gotten a lesser job, but this is really where my passion is. This is the most important thing to me. Well, that's part of the problem. The problem is that that's the most important thing to you. The problem is that that's the most important thing. That's a vice. What then is the first of the 10 commandments? So when we say Anoichi, it's Hashem laying out, say, let's get one thing straight. I am. God says, I am. Every dispute between two people will commonly, I shouldn't say every dispute, that's an over-exaggeration. Many disputes between people ultimately come down to not some sort of logical analysis of wit and wisdom. It's whose I am is going to win. Whose I am is going to be dominant. It's going to be blue because I said so. And this one says, no, it's going to be yellow because I said so. So Hashem lays out the premise of the 10 commandments based on this truth. Anoichi, I am. God says, I am. And if I am, then everything you do affirms that God is. Let's get one thing straight. I am. I'm God. And what do? I take you out of Egypt. I mean, it's not like I'm God and I beat you up. I'm God and I abuse you. I'm God and I just run you on pointless errands. I'm God and I do the greatest kindness for you. I took you out of Egypt. That was pretty nice of you. So it's not about God being a bully, but it's about God laying out the essential premise of my own existence. I am. Anoichi. So every time we do a mitzvah, when we do it for Hashem, why are you doing that? Because God asked me to. I am affirming God's I am. There's an interesting discussion in the Talmud. What is more profound, to do what I am commanded to do, or to do even that which I was not commanded to do? So it goes back and forth, and ultimately concludes that it is more profound, it is greater to do what I have been commanded to do. In part because, don't tell me what to do. My natural, don't tell me what to do. When I overcome that, and I do allow you to tell me what to do, now I have truly done something to affirm the oneness of Hashem. So let's revisit the story. Hashem wakes us up early in the morning after 7 weeks. We come to Har Sinai, and he essentially tells us 10 things that we knew already. We knew about Shabbos because when the manna started to fall, God told us don't collect it on Shabbos. We knew about the prohibition of murder 2,500 years ago. Cain killed Abel. We didn't need the, quote, 10 statements, 10 commandments to tell us what to do. We knew that already. What we did need is the affirmation of it. It's like getting married. It's the formality of it that gives it meaning and significance. It is what's the word I'm looking for? The celebration, whatever it is, I can't think of the word, the ceremony of it that gives it stature and thus eternality. That's what we experience there. So that our relationship is not just, okay, here's a list of things to do and don't do. It is that we have become, or brought to the fore, our union with the infinity of Hashem. And therefore, those 2 commandments, we heard directly from Hashem, because once you got those, everything else is commentary. Every other mitzvah is a way. How do I affirm God's oneness? Eat matzah, listen to the shofar. How do I avoid violating God's oneness? Don't eat pork and don't mix meat and milk and don't wear clothing that has wool and linen sewn in it together, etc., etc. He has 248 ways to affirm God's identity and 360 ways to avoid violating God's identity. So what is Anochi Hashem Elokecha? I am Hashem, your God. Now, just to take this one step further, and another illustration of this. Maimonides, about 900 years ago, he lived about 900 years ago, was the first one to codify Jewish law. The Talmud has got a sort of winding path of rules and laws that don't even necessarily follow an absolute logical sequence. So Maimonides came along and he reworked the entirety of Talmud, and he lays out the laws by thematic identity. And that itself, sort of the table of contents, is already half the genius of it, the way in which you organize it. So the laws of chametz and matzah are in a different book than the laws of the Pesach sacrifice, because whereas in the Talmud, they're all in the same book, because this is in the laws of sacrifices, and this is in the laws of holiday observance, and so on. Anyway, what does Maimonides choose to begin his laws with? Which, again, is not just law number one, but it's the premise, the foundation. The Maimonides begins with a quote, Yesod HaYesod is the foundation of all foundation, and the pillar of all wisdom is, and he uses a very particular word, which really, got him in trouble, and Chassidus really pounds home on this, to know that God is God, the first creation, and no thing can exist other than its being an expression of God. Now, what does it mean to know? And this is derived from this first of the 10 statements. When God says, I am God, your God, who took you out of the land of Egypt, as we mentioned, that doesn't seem to be an instruction. We all call it the 10 commandments, but Torah calls it the 10 statements. And some argue that that's an introduction, that since I'm God, therefore you should do these following 9 things. Others do read it as its own commandment, Maimonides being one of them. What is that? To know it, not just to know it like I know the name of the capitals of every state, like it's just data, but that I should have an intimate personal awareness of this, that this should be something that I pursue in my knowing. Now, I'll never get there, just like I'll never know math. I'll know some math, I'll know some applications of mathematics, but you can never know math, you can never know poetry, you can know poems, you can know the rules of poetry. But you can't truly know, I can't know another person. I can know their favorite foods, I can know their tendencies, I can know their sense of humor, but I cannot completely and utterly know them. So too, we are in the endless pursuit of the unattainable, of trying to know, or at least have some understanding of Hashem. That's the first of the 10 commandments. And this is what Chassidus is going to pound home to us. As we do mitzvahs, we become aligned with the oneness of Hashem. So again, they're both essentially the same point. So here we go. Even again, as the Tanya said, this is true of everybody. V'levar heitiv inyan zeh. So in order to properly understand this, and we've seen this phrase before, what does it mean to understand it well? It's not the difference between understanding it and understanding it better. It's not just I know it more. Like I know addition, now I also know subtraction, now I also know division, now I also know geometry. It's not just more information, it is how deeply it penetrates my existence. It's not just about data retention and the capacity to recite the ideas from memory, it is how deeply it penetrates the very essence of my existence. Tzarech lahaskia tchila b'ksoda Inyan umahus achdusa shalakodesh baruch hu, shenikri yochid umiyuchad. All you got to do is understand the absolute oneness of Hashem. Now, we are all familiar with the basic point that God is one. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. This is the foundation and the premise of all of Torah, and what they call, I don't know if you say Lahavdil, what we call monotheism. This is a basic idea. Of course, it's the essential creed. But what do we mean when we say God is one? So you might think, well, I got 2 pencils and 3 envelopes and 4 boxes of tissues and one God. That is one. They used to have many gods. We have one God. Okay, that's an idea. But that doesn't really capture why this is so profound and significant. So we have explained many times before that the premise that Avraham Avinu came to bring to the world was not just that my God is better than your God. Everybody had gods. Abraham's father made God. So what? Why do they get so angry at him? He's got a God. You got a God. Everyone's got a God. Because their gods were validated by the impact they would have. This God will make your crops grow. This God will make your children healthy. This God will protect you from your enemies. And Avram came along and he said, no, I got one God who does all of them. I mean, to use the most silliest of analogies, we used to have a camera and a video camera and a tape recorder. And now we have one phone that does all of that. Okay, so I got one phone. I got one piece of equipment. You got 7 pieces of equipment. It's not that. When we say that God is one, we mean that God is one with all matter. Now, that makes no sense. And I'm saying that somewhat deliberately, because the most essential rule of physics is that two objects cannot occupy the same space. Everybody's familiar with checkers and chess. The conceptual premise of chess is two pieces cannot occupy the same space. The one that comes knocks out the other one. And this is not just how you play the game of chess, but this is the conceptual idea about how the world functions. And even to this day, without a real deep dive here, is one idea comes and replaces another idea. Just like technology replaces the previous technology, that which is the most exciting thing replaces the other. And sometimes people replace other people with better people. I get a better barber, I got a different barber. I get a better friend, I replace friends. So this can happen even in the human realm. Why? Because in the world of science, this is an absolute. Two items cannot occupy the same space. That's an absolute. There's no way around it. So I win, you lose. Absolutely. I get ahead, you lose. It's a pie. My piece comes out of your pocket. And again, we've probably all met people who are hypersensitive to this and extraordinarily protective, because anything is limited, and therefore any less that I have, any more you have, it means I have less. And therefore we become extraordinarily protective of our time, of our emotional space, of our resources, of our kindness, and so on, for the fear that I will lose. Now, again, this is true in the world of physics. If I have 10 marbles and I give you a marble, I only have 9 marbles. But Torah allows us, again, to dig deeper, that even science becomes art if we will allow ourselves to get that far along. And that's the hard thing. I mean, we have lived through it with technology, because those people who invented, they saw that. They saw way beyond the limits and had these very creative ideas and so on. Now, when we talk about the oneness of Hashem, we are emphasizing not that there's only one God, but that God is one with all matter. It isn't separate. And again, it's so hard to articulate this in a secular language. My hand is not part of me, it is me. Now, of course, God forbid, a person could lose a limb and still be themselves, but it is one with them. And that's why, I mean, at the most ridiculous, if somebody would say, well, I got a better right hand for you, let me cut off your right hand and put on, that's ridiculous. Why? Because it's my right hand. It is absolutely one with me. It's not because I have been persuaded that my right hand is better than somebody else's right hand. It simply is one with me. And again, you think about the parental relationship, child-parent, parent-child. Hopefully the parent doesn't say, well, I got some better kids that I'll trade my kids in for. Again, it sounds ridiculous, but unfortunately, this conceptually does occur out there in the world, where a person is consumed only with the engineering and not at all with the poetry. And it's a hard thing. That's silly, and whatever it may be. So we're trying to understand, what do we mean that God is one? Again, it doesn't just mean there's one God, like there's one book on the table. So we explain. And look closely at this Hebrew word, because we're going to revisit it. Shenivra ha'olam mamish, shayu levadai. So the Alter Rebbe quotes this. You may recognize it. We say it in the High Holiday Davening. We sing it. We and all believe, and we'll talk about this word believe because it's an important word, that He, Hashem, is exclusive, and he is just like he was before he created the world. Shayahu levadai, Kamesha Kasav, there he was exclusive. This is, I'm going to read the words. I'm going to come back because it's a pretty delicate point. Kamesh Kasav, like it says, you recognize this. We say it every morning in the davening, in what we call the karbonos part of the davening. Atahu actually nivra elam. You are he before the world was created. Atahu mishenivra. Look closely at that word, mishenivra with the shin prefix. We're going to talk about it. When you created the world, Perish, that means humamish belishim shinoi. It is the same Hashem without any change. We're going to come back to this. Kidichsiv, like it says, Ani Hashem le'shanisi. I'm going to do not change. Ki'elam hazeh v'chein kol oilim esel yoinim. This physical world, and even the more subtle spiritual worlds. Remember, higher worlds doesn't mean better, but it means less materially defined, right? Remember the analogy of the mother with the child. When a mother is pregnant, the child has his own identity, but that identity is indistinguishable, or not indistinguishable is the wrong word, but non-disconnectable from, cannot be disconnected from the mother. Then the child's born, then the child becomes 10 years old. He goes away to sleepaway camp, and then he becomes an adult. It's the same child. It's the same alliance with the parent. It's more obvious in utero than it is when he's a 50-year-old adult, but it's the same child. So those are the high worlds. They make no impact on the singularity of Hashem. And look closely at this word, bihibaram, when they are created. A little nuanced difference from what we said before. Shin nivra with the hay and hibaram with the, I'm sorry, shin nivra with the shin and hibaram with the hay. We're going to revisit that. Mi'ayin liyesh, from nothing into something. Again, just as he was exclusively in existence before hibaram, they were created. We'll talk about this. So too, even after they are created, he is absolutely one. Shibaram, that they were created. Hibaram and Shibaram. It's a subtlety in the Hebrew grammar, which we will explore. But just notice that, again, it only comes across in the Hebrew. I don't know what the English translation differs, but there's a word Hibaram and Shibaram, very distinct, very important. Mishum, because the Kula Kamek Lichshiv, as things get closer to Hashem, they are less significant. And again, that sounds like, well, I don't care. It's not, doesn't have that connotation. That's a human connotation where I have things that are very important to me and things I can't be bothered with. But that's because we're limited. We have limited bandwidth, and I can only pay attention to so many things. Hashem is infinite, and therefore he doesn't have a pecking order of what I can give my attention to and what I can't be bothered with. That was the origin of idolatry. God can't be bothered with me. God worries about big things. God worries about the world and planets and suns and so on. It's actually the parsha that Hashem makes the sun set just for Yaakov, so he'll encamp on that spot. So there's no such thing to God of, well, he can't be bothered with that. That's not important enough for him. That doesn't work. Kain v'efes as not. Okay, so let's go and revisit all of this. Our essential point that we're trying to illustrate is, again, an idea that almost doesn't exist in the world of the physics. For example, when we talk about a year is 365 days. A day is 24 hours. So a day is a unit, but it's not really a unit. It's just a combination of many units. An hour is a combination of minutes. A minute is a combination of seconds. Yet we call it 1 day, 1 year, 1 month. We use these terms, a body, but it's really a composite of independent parts. There is an analogy, if I have one pencil and I add another pencil, I have two pencils. But if I have one raindrop and I add another raindrop, I still only have one raindrop. It's a bigger raindrop, but it's still one. You can no longer distinguish, you can't separate out that original raindrop from the second raindrop. Without getting distracted, we used to talk about a melting pot, now we talk about a salad bowl. Does everybody forfeit their individual identity and become some new identity, or everybody just enhances the other identities? Again, this idea is not going to find any true parallel, at least not that I can think of, in a scientific world. Because of the chess illustration, two pieces cannot occupy one space. One will displace the others. that idea, which again is a core tenet of science, uh, negates this understanding. So, what does it mean when we say that it's not significant? Again, it sounds like I don't care. It's not important. It sounds like an insult. It's not, God. What does God care? He's God. He has the whole world. And this is a common understanding. I'm talking about amongst Torah people that the mitzvahs aren't. They don't. God doesn't care. It's for us. What does God care? God's telling you you're better off if you keep kosher. You're better off if you shake the lulav and esrog. You're better off if you don't mix wool and linen. God doesn't care. That is a common perception. That is a way in which Torah is sometimes illustrated. Now, that could be rather disappointing. Imagine after 120, a person comes up to Shemayim, says, God, I did it. I kept kosher and I gave tzedakah. And God says, well, I hope you enjoyed it. Well, God, I did it for you. Me, I'm God. What do I care? I don't care what you do. It's not going to feel very rewarding, that God just said, what do I don't care. I'm God. I don't care what you do. That doesn't seem very meaningful to us. Could be, we have no way of saying God can't do that. He can do whatever he wants. But that doesn't sound like a very rewarding or a very meaningful life to just do a bunch of stuff that nobody cares about. And so what do we mean when we say that God does not, it's not significant? We don't mean that he doesn't care. We mean that it is absolutely one with the infinity of Hashem. That God and all of existence are absolutely one. Again, maybe some examples that we can find that touch upon this imperfectly. The parent who feels the pain of their child. The story, it's a little bit of a long story, but with this young girl in Crown Heights was going through some spiritual struggles, and the Rebbe said to her, I feel the pain you're going through. And she said, I don't believe you, which is kind of chutzpah. And the Rebbe said, one day you're going to have a child, and that child will be teething, and you will know what it means to feel the pain of somebody else. You will know what that means, that you feel that pain and that suffering. So, yes, I do feel your pain. It sounds like a gimmick and a line and so on. Why? Not because I'm such a good guy, but because it's absolutely one, meaning the classic example, the Talmud says the guy, it was an odd story, but it illustrates a point. Maybe not so odd. It was basically the Siamese twins were born and they didn't know what to do. This was something that totally baffled them. And they said, is this one person too? But they didn't know. So they made an experiment. If they'll pour hot water on the foot of one of them, will the head scream? Will he feel that pain? And this is, it's a true story, and it's often used as an analogy for the Jewish people, how they feel the pain of others. Well, again, it's not because I'm empathetic and sympathetic. Just like if I pinch my finger, I say, ow. Why is my mouth saying ow? My mouth doesn't hurt because it's one with the finger. Again, I hope that this is illustrated how impossible it is to illustrate this because it doesn't exist in a world of science. It only exists in this world of Kedusha. And this is in part what frustrates people with the study of Hasidus, because we are very much about up, down, right, left, in, out, black, white. That's where we live. And these concepts are harder for us scientifically to grasp. And that's our common mechanism. I am, and I see it through my eyes. Can we get over that and start to see it from Hashem's eyes? So based on this, we raise these two or these few quotes. One that we say every day in the davening, that Hashem is the same Hashem before he created the world. Why? Because the world is one with Hashem. That's why it's important to Hashem. Again, in English, this sounds like I don't care. It's meaningless to me. No, it's so meaningful because it's one with him. It's not meaningful because that would suggest it's outside of it. Like my right hand doesn't thank my left hand. It's one. It doesn't thank it. It doesn't say thank you I want to thank my hands for, it's ridiculous. So the creation is one with Hashem. It's not some other thing that's over there that I have. It's not outside of me. And this is that idea the Alter Rebbe will talk about in the Shara Yichud V'Amunah section, the second section of Tanya, that Hashem didn't just create the world 57, 86 years ago. Hashem is creating the world in every moment. The world doesn't have independent identity. It is continuously being created, like an idea is in my head. I think about it, it's there. I stop thinking, it's gone. So since the world doesn't have separate independent identity, which is the essence of idolatry, which is to say that there is some independent force, my My existence is continuously being fueled by the infinity of Hashem. Ipso facto, it is absolutely one with Hashem. And that's why we say that it's no different before he created the world and after he created the world. Because God himself doesn't change. So therefore, these worlds, these stages of awareness, do not gnaw at God's attention. They are God. Just like my right hand is not calling out to me. In fact, as we know, when any body part starts to call out, it's because it's not well, right? I mean, I give you all a blessing. You never want to get a call from your doctor that he wants to talk to you about your pancreas. I don't want to talk about it. I just want it to work perfectly, like my printer and my car and the furnace. I don't want to know about it. When you start to learn about it, it's because it's not functioning properly. And this is what we call the diuk, the precise wording. Now, again, I don't know what the English words are used here, but in Hebrew, there's two different words which I try to highlight. One is shinivra, and one is hibarim. Now, the root word is the same, word for create. One is that he created, and the other is a little bit more passive, as it was created. What is the difference between these two terms, hibarim, shibarim? Again, they sound almost, and they can be translated almost identically, but there is a subtle distinction there between them. One is an active mechanism of creation. That is, the level, to use the Kabbalistic term, of Elohim, where God is now actively going into creative mode. He is actively shifting his attention to creation. So it's a little bit more deliberate. You might think if something's a little bit more deliberate, it's less naturally illustrative. As we know, that a person's unscripted words are probably more demonstrative of who they are than their scripted words, because their scripted words are a little bit foreign to their very identity. They're being very calculated. So shinivra, that he creates, I don't know, again, I'm sorry, I don't know what the English words are, suggests that when God is being a little bit more deliberate, hibarim is a little bit more effortless, a little bit more natural, which again is a little bit more true to the essence of self. Again, the way they say a person's native language comes out when he counts. He's multilingual, but he counts in his native language. Also, when he hits his thumb with the hammer. What the Alter Rebbe is illustrating here is both the level of creation that's more deliberate, and by which I mean more mechanical, and the one that's more intuitive, that's more effortless. Both of them are, again, non-attached. They're not separate. They're not piled on. They're not add-ons to the essence of existence of God. They are all flowing from God, and they are true of him entirely. And that's why there's a total oneness with Hashem, even after they are manifest in a physical identity. All right, we'll stop here.